All right, hey, hello, and welcome to part 2 of this 3-part breakdown of Selecta by Chase and Status. It's good to see your face again. Have you become more beautiful in the meantime? I don't know. But I do know that we're gonna dive straight in. The only thing I want to say is that if you haven't watched part 1 yet, go and do that right here. It contains a lot of cool stuff, but today we're getting to the meat and the potatoes. All right, let's dive in. So, where we left off in the previous video was we just did the intro, we had the pads, we had the introductory drums, we had the little delayed drum roll, and it was moving into the section where the guitar starts playing. So this is what we're going to be doing now.
Circle the block, come true, and all rock. Say them better than we wouldn't know them love chat. Them a wear frock, we a bust off the top. We a set trend, them a tech box. No, we no big friend, we no do that. That's them of all time, if you know that. If you this way, you must get slapped. Selecta. All the selecta for play a duff hot. Cause a boy body drop, we full of tough, tough. That is selecta for...
Alright, so today we're going to talk about that epic guitar and how it fits into the rest of the song. So it's worth noting really quickly that in the previous video we already talked about this bass reverb coming in here, introducing the sub bass, or well, the sort of sub guitar-y bass. Leading into this guitar section, we're doing the exact same thing. So what we have here is we have this guitar group, which we'll get into in just a minute, and it plays this note. And there's a whole video on reverse reverbs, which you can check out over here. But essentially what we've done is we've just taken this note, put a really high reverb on it, recorded it in a separate audio check, which is this bass reverb channel. And that was actually just like this. It was a reverb tail of just this single note. And we reversed it using R, and we just put it right before the guitar kicks in so that it leads up to the guitar and makes it a lot more epic and creates a lot more suspension. So then let's talk about what happens to the structure of the song. In the intro, we have the pads going, we have this little arp going, but they are only intro elements. They lead up to the big guitar sounds, and all of that drops away. The drums also drop away, and we're really just focused on the vocals here and this guitar bridge, which introduces in a different timbre the horn brass sound of the drop. So what we're going to be doing is we'll just have these vocals here that we've already separated, and we're going to focus on building this guitar group here. And the only things to note is that, well, we've got this reverse reverb like we talked about, and that at the beginning, we want the first hit of the guitar to come in as powerful as possible. So we can do that, and it often happens like this by introducing just a single kick on the start of that guitar. So if we just were to take the guitar by itself, that first hit would sound like this. But if we introduce it together with the kick, then it sounds like... That's already a lot more powerful. And we can further go and enhance that by adding some effects. So we're gonna introduce a white noise sweep, but then a down sweep, so that's literally just a riser reversed. You can press R to reverse any sample in Ableton. And we're going to introduce a crash. Now, the white noise sweep, that's just something that happens between every section. Sweep up and a sweep down. This happens a lot. But another thing that sort of comes from the real world is when a band would be playing, when anyone starts playing a new instrument, it's not just the instruments playing, it's also the drummer kicking the kick drum and hitting the hat, like the open hat basically, very loudly to make a crash. And what it's going to do is going to add attack and an extra sort of bit of bass, right? So like crunch from the kick and the bass from the kick and these sort of super high noise attack from that cymbal crash, and that's gonna give it a lot more energy on that first hit. So we emulate that by getting a crash and a kick, and we've got this like little down riser, and then together it sounds a lot cooler. It sounds like this. So that is a lot more epic right away. All right, so let's see what we've got on this guitar group here. And essentially, whenever you want to create an electric guitar, your absolute best bet is to go for a guitar sample library. What we saw in the previous video already, there is a really good free one from Spitfire called Labs. You can just look it up. It's free, and you've got this whole selection of guitars here. What we're looking for really is like either one of these 80s or one of these rock guitars, right? And it needs to pluck. It needs to bang, 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 whatever. Whatever. So we can take one of those, but just by itself, it doesn't sound all that interesting. So if we were to sort of take all the, the saturation and stuff off, it actually sounds pretty boring. It would just sound almost like a very boring piano. The character that we're looking for, that rock character, comes from an amp, which is essentially a sort of saturation, some overdrive, and actual saturation, right? And these can be blended to taste. You can achieve all different kinds of levels of grunge by doing this, but essentially that'll change it from what you just heard to, in the case of the high note, or in the case of the low note, it'll change it even more dramatically from this to this. So that is a big, big difference. And then the final thing that actually you want to always consider when you're using guitar, it's very likely that whenever you hear that really powerful guitar, that what they do is add a perfect fifth, so 7 semitones up, because of the harmonic relationship between those two frequencies. They oscillate at a mathematically equivalent rate. I'm not really sure how to say it, but it makes it a lot more grungy. You can use this in Serum patches, but it also works with guitar, and it's called a power chord like that because it matters a lot. So if we take the first note without this extra chord added to it, it's this. But when we add this seventh, it's... So that's way better. And that's exactly what we're looking for here, to give it that power and that grunge. So as for the bass sound of the guitar, it's exactly the same in both this high and this low electric guitar patch. It's essentially just one of these sample libraries, an amp on it, a saturator. In case of the higher one, also a little bit overdrive, and the function of that overdrive is actually like almost like a multiband saturator. It just gives more fuzz to the top end, because the top end in the original song sounds extra grungy, or whatever the real name is for it. Yeah, some little frequencies attenuated just so we could get closer to the original sound, but that is not entirely necessary. That's just to taste. And then the difference between this low and this electric guitar is that the low plays all the notes of this note progression except for the top two. So it plays this. And the reason that it doesn't play those notes is because I tried it. But these do not sound as high as the ones that I wanted. And it also just didn't completely have the right timbre just yet. So what I did is I separated the note progression. The lower notes are being played by this much lower guitar, this pretty much the same patch but at a lower note with a little bit less saturation. And then I took the top two notes and I put them in this high electric guitar, and there's just there's an extra frequency attenuation on some of the mids here, there's an extra overdrive on there, and it was a lot easier to create the timbre that I wanted. This is something that you can do in your productions as well. Sometimes it's a hard reality, but not everything fits into one channel or into one patch. You might have to take a couple of notes apart and change the timbre of that. It happens a lot in productions where you don't even notice it. You think, oh, the sound is slightly different. Turns out there's a whole different channel with just some other processing on it in an attempt to make things more interesting, because the more varied, the more exciting it is for the brain. And so what these channels are playing is E3 going into A3 and then back again. And of course, the top notes are literally just B and C switching each other off. That's it for this guitar. And then of course we've got this group processing here. And what's important is that you don't have to compress this, but I liked compressing it because, yeah, it sort of glued the sound together a little bit more. But much, much more importantly, because in this section of the song, there is no lead playing, and a lead is often accompanied by a sub bass. We want to make sure that the bass from this guitar gets a big, nice boost, because it needs to cut through, well, it doesn't have to cut through anything. There's nothing else there. So we want that bass to be extra, extra present. So we're going to put like a pretty aggressive low shelf here. And then even more, we're just going to, nudge it up a little bit around that sort of, those subby frequencies, so that the entire group gets a boost in those sounds. And it really does make a difference. If we were to turn all these off, it would be something like this. Right? So that's a little bit thin. And when we do add these, it sounds like. So that's a lot of the body of the sound, and the power that it gets from the sub is also not to be underestimated. And the last thing is we want some reverb on this group here. You can use any reverb that you want, and I found that about a 20% mix sounds just about right, but with some pre-delay added here. And the function of pre-delay, a lot of people don't use this, is you don't, especially when something needs to have power, you don't want it to automatically be reverb, because it's going to not be the original signal. It's going to be already the reverb signal. And pre-delay first does a couple of milliseconds, however much you select, without reverb, and that means that the sound is less washed out. And if you have the first hit of that be pre-delayed, it means there's more punch to your sound. And then the final thing that's worth noticing is there's a little bit of action going on in the drums. So when introducing the bridge to the build-up section, there's actually a kick, a snap, and a clap going on here, which we'll get into in the next video. But it's another example of just creating a little bit of excitement before introducing the actual, and you can hear what that does by just listening to it. So we already hear just a little, you know, sort of like a snap coming in. It just gives us a little bit of more bridging between these two sections. And then, of course, leading up to this build-up is already like a little mini pre-build-up with some white noise, with a sweep. We've got a tonal riser here that we found. There was quite an aggressive sort of bleepy kind of riser going on. And then that's nice also because it's a little bit more digital and is in contrast with a lot of the more analog guitar sounds and stuff like that. So just using a sample here, that's a bit screechy, and that's, you know, it's exciting. And then, of course, we got a reverse crash going here, which is this sound, but then reversed, which sounds like this. And what I like to do sometimes is to create some extra power, is get a sample of an explosion, which is going to sound like this. And all of these samples have either some reverb added to them or not, depending on sort of how washed out you want them to be. The explosion has some EQing going on because otherwise it's very aggressive, right? We want to take out some of those highs and those lows. But just like that, it's like someone dropped something really heavy, and it adds to the explosiveness of the section change, you know, that transition between sections. And then, you know, whenever you find a sample like I did with this explosion and you don't quite like the exact timbre that it's at, you can play around with a shifter, you know. I did that in this case to just changes it ever so slightly. All right, that's it for today's video. We got the big guitar covered. Now we're going to get to the absolute meat and potatoes, which is going to be released in 2 days from now, which is the build up and the drop. All right, thank you for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and have a great day.